He is retired from the LAPD, 33 years in law enforcement. He talks about his own officer-involved shooting, a life-or-death situation, plus being a supervisor with one of his officers involved in a shooting, the impact on him, and more. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is brought to you in part by Breakfast with Champions, holding rooms daily in the Clubhouse drop-in social audio chat app. Download the app today. It is free. And join us in Breakfast with Champions, where everyone gets to see the table. Be heard. Find new friends from all over the globe. That's the Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse drop-in social audio app. Get more details. Download the app today for free and get more details at thebwcinfo.com. Contact us from Ohio. We have Jeff Wenninger on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Jeff is retired LAPD. Get this. He did 33 years in law enforcement. We'll cue the jokes for a little bit later on. He's the author of the upcoming book On Thin Ice, and his website is lawenforcementconsultants.com. Before we get started, Jeff, thanks for your service. Very much appreciated.
Oh, thank you.
33 years. You need your head examined? What are you trying to do, 50? What's going on?
33 years. Actually, I initially wanted to do just 5. My intention was to go back to school and get my PhD and be a professor of criminal justice. But, once I got into it, there were so many different experiences that I wanted to have. And, I had the goal of trying to influence law enforcement in a way that it could be better and there'd be better outcomes, most significantly with high-stress circumstances.
And by the way, the LAPD, we've had several people on from LAPD. We have several on over the last few years in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. They've gotten some bad raps, and not everybody on that department is like that. And as a matter of fact, I'd go so far as to say they're some of the best police I've ever heard of.
Well, in the law enforcement circle, cops from Los Angeles, whether it's LAPD, LA County Sheriffs, they're going to be your highest trained officers that you'll find anywhere probably in the country. But just like anywhere else, you have some of your issues relative to culture, the insular nature of law enforcement, and some systemic issues. We had to deal with a 10-year consent decree, which was definitely warranted. The department had more than a number of decades of opportunities to make some recommended changes to address a lot of the issues that were identified, and there was resistance to that. So it ultimately resulted in the consent decree that I actually had some very significant roles and responsibilities under that were impacted by that consent decree.
How long? You did 33 years. So what was the highest rank you achieved?
Lieutenant. I retired as a lieutenant.
That's pretty good. Congratulations, Lieutenant. I had the mindset I wanted to go as far up as I could. I wanted to be command staff. And unfortunately, I got hurt and retired. I got hurt at 32 and retired at 33. So my career is cut short. But the thought now, as I look back, hindsight's 20/20. I look back and go, man, 30 years in law enforcement. 10 years was crazy. In Baltimore, it was insane. In Los Angeles, it's insanity. I'm not going to ask you this, but there's a saying that I have is I don't miss the circus, but I do miss the clowns that I worked with. Some of the people were phenomenal. Some of the people that I policed with were phenomenal, and the community was phenomenal. But City Hall was a different story altogether. And the command staff, I don't have a lot of positive feelings about them.
I had a fortunate opportunity to work for some very impressive chiefs of police. As a lieutenant, I worked for William Bratton. I reviewed and wrote his articulation and report that was submitted to the Honorable Board of Police Commissioners for the adjudication of all lethal force in officer-involved shooting cases. And I had a seat at the table, and I learned quite a bit from him. Actually, I initially started working for him when I was a sergeant, and when I made lieutenant, I expressed to him that I was looking forward to going back out into the field and being a watch commander at a division. And he said, well, it looks like you have a decision to make. You can either go out to a division and learn how to run a watch, or you can continue to work for me and learn how to run a police department.
Yeah.
And obviously that was a pretty simple decision for me to make. But, I learned a lot by just observing and, learning from his tutorials, because he was very generous in his explanation of his rationale for why he made decisions that he made. And I learned quite a bit from him.
There were some of the bosses, and we'll get to your story in a moment. There were some of the bosses I worked for that were just phenomenal. They were great police. They were great police administrators. They were great command staff. Towards the end of the career, it really changed, and the local government really started getting involved excessively, if you ask me. And people, and I'm not going to stand up on my soapbox, but people that did nothing wrong, that followed all the rules and regulations, that did everything the right way, got jacked up. They got jammed up in a big, bad way. And people who were absolute scumbags got promoted. And I don't want you to feel like you're compelled to add a statement to that. I want to talk about your career in policing in L.A. And by the way, before we get into your career, Hollywood loves LAPD. They just love doing shows about it. Some of them are so good, some of them are so bad, but I don't watch a whole lot of American-made police dramas. How about you?
No, I don't watch too much television.
Yeah, and the reason why is I just don't think they do a very good job. They don't do a very good job of accuracy, of street things that go on, and they certainly do a horrible job on character development and dialogue. Some of the best conversations I've ever had were with other police.
Right. The one thing I would say is people often ask me, why did you choose Los Angeles to go to from Ohio for your law enforcement career? And when I was in college, that was back when the movie Colors came out with Robert Duvall and Sean Penn. And that movie influenced me to want to go out and work in Los Angeles as a law enforcement officer.
So you're a young guy.
Yeah, I was in college at the time, yeah.
You know what influenced me? This will show you my age. Joseph Wambaugh and his novels. I believe he's retired LAPD.
Yes, he is.
And the movies he did, they were based off his books. They had a huge impact on me. And without getting into my story, I wanted to be a priest first, and then I decided on police work. And it was a passion. It was a calling. Unlike you, I know I wanted to do this. You said at the beginning of the conversation you would do it for like 5 years, and you get the bug, didn't you?
Well, I did, because there were so many things. The one thing that's so outstanding about a department the size of Los Angeles Police Department is the diversified experiences that you can get. There's so many different things you can do, and I took advantage of that. I always would say that if you retired from this job and you didn't acquire some level of expertise that you could parlay into something else in retirement, then you didn't do a very good job. So I did that, and I found every aspect of my career, whether as a police officer, sergeant, or lieutenant, to just be very fascinating and kept me intrigued and involved.
We had in our department, and LAPD was very similar in rank and chain of command. We had police officers, we had sergeants, then we had lieutenants. And then above that, and now it's different, but above that you had captains and the command staff. You could go from lieutenant to a major district commander very quickly, and a lot of captains were bypassed. Captains were considered the end of the road. So when I say street cops, that's the ultimate compliment coming from a guy like me. But when I say lieutenants were street cops, they were. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Return our conversation with Jeff Henninger in just a few moments. He's retired LAPD, 33 years, author of the upcoming book On Thin Ice, and his website is lawenforcementconsultants.com. If you want to be a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, simply contact us. It couldn't be easier. You can send us a message on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show page, or email jay@letradio.com. That's JAY@letradio.com. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. What is a desiccator cabinet? A desiccator cabinet is a specialized cabinet that maintains a low humidity environment to preserve your valuable samples and substances, preventing degradation. Where can you find the best selection, service, and great prices on desiccator cabinets? The answer is simple. DesiccatorCabinetsDirect.com. Go online and visit DesiccatorCabinetsDirect.com. That's DesiccatorCabinetsDirect.com. Now available on Amazon.
Hi, I'm Julie Loken, CEO of the Mediacasters, an omni-media company obsessed with Breakfast with Champions every morning on the Clubhouse social audio app. This inspiring community helps me live a bigger, bolder life. And the best part? BWC is free. Download the Clubhouse social audio app today and join me for your daily dose of inspiration in Breakfast with Champions. Both are free. Online at thebwcinfo.com.
Return our conversation with Jeff Wenninger from the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. He is in Ohio, retired LAPD, 33 years on the job, retired as a rank lieutenant, authored the upcoming book On Thin Ice, and his website is lawenforcementconsultants.com. I slipped up earlier, called him Jeff Henninger. I don't know why I did that. It's Jeff Wenninger. I went through, unfortunately, in my career, and I say unfortunately because it's never like it was portrayed in the media. I went through 4 shootings, officer-involved shootings, in a little more than 10 years. And the first 2, I never fired a shot back. The second 2 were totally different affairs, and thank God everybody lived. But none of them, and a couple close calls, none of them were like what the media puts out. And I always say this, every person that shot at me as a police officer, they never shot at me because of my race. They shot at me because they didn't want to go to jail. However, if I return fire, it's automatically about race, isn't it?
It can be. You know, when I was the lieutenant officer in charge of the detective entity that investigated all officer-involved shootings, I had to call the chief of police and brief him on what I knew very early on. And one of the first questions that would come out of the chief's mouth was, what is the race of the suspect?
Right.
What is the race of the officer?
And I always say this, they're factors. They're not always facts. Or they're facts, but they're not factors in the case. Like, let's compare it to an auto accident. You have a fatal auto accident. Whether it was rainy and rain-slicked roads is a factor. It's not just a fact, but it can be a factor in the accident. Oftentimes, the race of the people involved, it's a fact, but it doesn't have anything to do with the outcome or why shots were fired. Was that your experience?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it really didn't factor in at all. Primarily, though, you needed to know because the public perception and their potential response to an officer-involved shooting can be magnified in a negative way if race can be claimed to be part of what influenced the shooting.
Right.
So it is all part of being self-aware as a law enforcement agency, how you can best respond to the needs of the community in which the incident occurred to help quell any of these questions, any concerns relative to the incident being an excessive force incident or shooting that's out of policy. And I actually got quite a bit of experience in working with the communities, with the clergy and the business people and the neighborhood block groups and so on and so forth, to try to make sure that the story that was accurate, that the LAPD would have a strong message and could be heard and can control that narrative before things would blow up and cause additional problems in the community. So I do understand why those questions were asked.
I do, and unfortunately, a lot of it's because of the past law enforcement agencies, what they did. And I always say this, Birmingham, Alabama, and the Civil Rights March, and all the things they did then. We've got, people still hold that over your heads, and it's still part of our history. And it's part of my history when I was alive. Then you weren't. But it's something that we can't outdo. We can't outrun a lot of the bad incidents. But one of the things that people say to me, and I'll get to your shooting in a moment, is they'll say, as officer-involved shooting, and first of all, I don't watch body camera video. I don't watch any of this stuff. It triggers me. I don't want to get into it. Secondly, I don't draw opinions. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. If I see the facts in a case I do not like, I will speak about it. But I don't speak often about it. But they'll say, well, it was a race of people involved. And they'll say, oh, well, so-and-so the same race. Well, thank God. I'm like, shut your pie hole. You're contributing to the problem. And I know you can't comment on that, but to me, that really aggravates the situation. Involved in a shooting at what part of your career?
It was very early on. As the first couple of years with the LAPD. I was with the LA County Sheriffs for 3 years, and then I lateraled over to LAPD. So it was about my 5th year in law enforcement. And
what happened that caused the shots fired?
I was working. I had a female partner. She was driving, and we were working, and we got a radio call. It was a code 3. It was a shots fired, assault with a deadly weapon there now radio call. So responded code 3, and it was on an east-west street, and we were coming from the west driving eastbound. The address was on the north side of the road, so the driver's side of the vehicle would be adjacent to the location. And she made a tactical error. She drove us right up in front of the apron of the driveway of the residence where this occurred.
Ever do.
We should have stopped, far short of that and progressed with appropriate cover. And basically what had happened was the location was a duplex. It was one of those where you had a residence on the first floor and then a residence on the second floor, where you have a front porch that goes along the whole front of the location, and then you have 2 doors that are adjacent. One goes into the first floor, and the other one goes up steps to the second floor. And this boyfriend and girlfriend, they resided in the second story apartment, and they got in some type of a disturbance, an argument. She fled. He went after her, and with an AK-47, he fired and took both of her legs out, had compound fractures of both legs. And prior to our arrival, he had grabbed her and he drug her back up onto the front porch. So when we responded, we could see him up on the front porch and the blood that was on the sidewalk from him dragging her back up there. And unfortunately, my partner put us in a bad spot, and he opened fire on our black and white police vehicle. Now, this was back before we had any ballistic doors on our cars. Really, the only cover you had would be the engine block.
Right.
And so I threw myself out the passenger door. I had my legs were still up on the passenger seat where I had been sitting. My shoulders were on the street, and my partner kind of used me as a ramp to slide across, and she scurried to the rear of the car behind the rear passenger tire. And then I moved to the front of the car where I used the engine block as cover. And it was quite stressful. And I don't know if this is a product of having been an elite athlete. I played Division I college ice hockey on scholarship. And so, one could argue that if when you're an elite athlete, you have the ability to perform under stress and remain calm, or you wouldn't be an elite athlete, so to speak.
Uh-huh.
But in this circumstance, when we were taking rounds, everything really slowed down for me.
You and me both.
Yeah, it was like I had an entire conversation in my head. So I'm worrying about where the suspect is. Is he advancing on us, which he was? And I remember thinking to myself, well, if I peek my head over the hood to see where he is and it's a mistimed peek, it's not going to end well. It's going to be quite ugly. I can't do that to my father.
Right.
That was the conversation I had with myself. So I remember thinking, well, okay, I'll look under the car. And I did that, and unfortunately, the location, it was kind of had a raised front yard. So all I could see was under the car and just beyond the sidewalk. I couldn't see where he was. So at the point that I would see his legs, he would be nearly on top of the car.
We're going to take a short break on that note. Return our conversation with Jeff Wenninger in just a few moments. Talking about the officer-involved shooting he was in and much more. He's the author of the upcoming book on Thin Ice, and his website is lawenforcementconsultants.com. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Julie Loken, CEO of the Mediacasters, an Omni media company obsessed with Breakfast with Champions every morning on the Clubhouse social audio app. This inspiring community helps me live a bigger, bolder life. And the best part? BWC is free. Download the Clubhouse social audio app today and join me for your daily dose of inspiration in Breakfast with Champions. Both are free. Online at thebwcinfo.com.
Remember when news was free? Be sure to check out the Newsbreak app. It's free. And be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. Newsbreak is your #1 local news app for current events, free live news for you and your community. Download the Newsbreak app today for free. And be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. That's the free Newsbreak app. Be sure to look for and follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast. Return conversation with Jeff Wenninger on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. He's retired from the LAPD, 33 years in law enforcement. Author of the upcoming book On Thin Ice. His website is lawenforcementconsultants.com. Before the break, Jeff, you're talking about this officer-involved shooting you're in. You're pinned behind the car. And I went through things where things slowed down. And I didn't hear things like when a partner was yelling at me and it sounded like a TV on another room. You could tell there's sounds, but you don't know what they're saying. A lot of things were impacted. And I wouldn't describe myself as an elite athlete. But when you said you peeked your head up and you're wondering, is this mistimed? I can't do it to my dad. It's amazing the thoughts that go through your head in life and death situations, isn't it?
It is, and it's like you said. I couldn't tell you what my partner was doing, whether my partner was screaming or talking to me, or was curled up in a ball. I have no idea. I was just so focused on the immediate threat to my life, and so I was focusing on that, and just having this conversation with myself, and to the point where I'm like, well, let's look underneath the car. I tried that didn't work, and then I thought to myself, well, if I were a betting man, he's probably going to come across the front of the car. So I just laid back and I took a Weaver type of shooting position while laid on my back with a aim point over the hood of the car, saying, "Oh, I probably got 1 or 2 rounds. I'm going to have to make them count, or this is going to end ugly." And those were the thoughts verbatim that I had in my head, and they're ingrained in my head. And right at that moment, we had put out a help call, and with the LAPD, we have multiple air units that are up, and they have a police officer pilot, as well as a police officer who serves as an observer, who does all the communication with the units on the ground. And back then, the pilot actually was a Vietnam veteran who had flown helicopters in Vietnam. So this guy, he didn't hesitate. He saw the predicament that we were in. He brought that airship down around tree level, and he went into what seemed to me to be like a hover type position. And the observer got on the PA, and he yelled, "Hey, look up here," expletive, to the suspect. And the suspect turned and started firing at the helicopter, where they then moved northbound and it went up behind a building. But that drew him away from us and gave us an opportunity to redeploy. And then after we had redeployed, he had then positioned himself back up on the porch where his girlfriend was, who was laying there in her blood, and he took a seat on the stairwell, and all I could really see was his shins from my position behind the tree I had moved to. And so then everything just kind of slowed down. They called SWAT, and their personnel resources come in. They relieve all patrol personnel resources on the perimeter. They set up their snipers with their spotters, and all of that's going on. Really, managed chaos that only the LAPD could really orchestrate.
Right.
But at the end of the day, what had happened, the suspect was on the phone. Back then you didn't have cell phones. It was a long cord phone that he had brought all the way down the steps, and he was talking to the communications division on the phone, and he made a comment, I'm going to kill her. And he stood up, and as he stood up to point the rifle at her head, that's when the shots rang out, and he was shot and killed. And that the whole stress of that, it's like as I tell it, I remember everything like verbatim as I was thinking it.
Right.
And it caused me to have some, I had problems sleeping. It caused me to have like physical consequences. I had a hard time, I had diarrhea and stuff for like a week.
My stomach would get jacked up at the drop of a hat. It was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it was just very very weird. And back then, LAPD, the machismo of police officers, it just really wasn't something that you would admit that you had any problem with, that you were having things that you were struggling with relative to the stress that you were just under in that officer-involved shooting. So much progress has been made in that regard, and I've had a significant role in seeing that has occurred with the LAPD. But at the same time, there's still a lot of work to be had, because those invisible wounds really play themselves out in multiple different ways, and there just really needs to be a bigger effort and continued effort to break the stigma associated to getting some counseling and mental health stuff relative to
right. Back then we didn't talk about it, and somebody used the term machismo, which you did, which is fine, but there was another side to it. If you admitted to the department that you were having any kind of mental issues, they immediately took action, and you were suspended, and they would send you off to and you would, what we called rubber gun. You'd be sent to a division where everybody who was there had a mental health issue, and you were scorned. You were looked upon as something was wrong with you. And you couldn't be trusted anymore. And the thing for me, I can't speak for you, having my partners and the people that work with me and for me trust me and know that I'm level-headed and know that I'm going to do the right thing all the time and I got their backs and all that stuff was important to me. Was it important to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's, what you say is spot on. The culture in law enforcement often stigmatizes mental health struggles that officers have. And, admittingly, admitting that you need help is viewed as a sign of weakness, and it potentially can jeopardize your career. So oftentimes officers don't say anything.
Right.
And even though, like with the LAPD, you have behavioral science services that are available to you, you don't seek those services because notifications will be made to your commanding officer,
right.
And it just is not going to bode well for you.
And I understand the civil liability aspect of it. The city governments and the city hall and state and county, whoever it might be, the federal government, they have to do to protect themselves. I get it. I really do. For a command staff point of view, I do. But for the street men and women that go through this, they didn't ask for that. They didn't sign up. People always say this. You know what you signed up for. Well, I thought I knew what I signed up for, Jeff, but it was far more violent and traumatic than I realized. How about you?
Well, it's not that it's just more violent. It's just you don't understand the repercussions of being exposed to the violence,
right,
in these types of stressful situations, and how that's going to actually impact your life. And fortunately, with the LAPD, a lot of progress has been made. I was instrumental in creating what's called a debrief model. So every time that you're involved in a lethal force scenario, whether it's a use of force that results in a death of a suspect or it's an officer-involved shooting, you mandatorily have to go to a debrief session where you talk about the things that went well and the things that you can improve upon, and you do that together as a group with training division personnel. But more importantly, you go to mandatory behavioral science services. Everybody who is significantly involved in a lethal force scenario has got to go to multiple appointments before they're cleared to go back into the field. So what really is occurring there is everybody's different. You and I may be exposed to the exact same experience, but we're going to respond to it differently.
Differently, right?
In the aftermath. So nobody in this sense is being ostracized. Nobody's being stigmatized because everybody is required to go through it.
And one of the things that we have to talk about, there's a difference, and we'll get into more of Jeff's story in a moment. There's a difference between going through this yourself, which is traumatic enough, and then being a supervisor and have one of your people go through it. And you have to look at things differently. When we return to our conversation on Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. Jeff is retired LAPD, 33 years in law enforcement, author of the upcoming book on thin ice, and his website is lawenforcementconsultants.com. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Learn how to unlock your potential to persuade, profit, and make a profound impact
all online and from the privacy of your home or work. Learn tips to skyrocket your influence and transform the way you communicate to increase your profits, success, and influence. Join us for an exclusive 90-minute live webinar that will revolutionize your ability to connect, convince, and convert. Get more details at letpops.com, letpops.com. That's letpops.com.
Return conversation on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show with Jeff Wenninger, 33 years in law enforcement, retired LAPD lieutenant, currently living in Ohio. He's the author of the upcoming book On Thin Ice, and his website is lawenforcementconsultants.com. Again, thank you for your service, Jeff. 33 years is a very long time, and I appreciate you talking about the use of force situation you were in. Before we get into, as a sergeant, and I know, what rank were you when you had one of your men, your officers involved in a shooting?
I was a sergeant.
Okay. It a totally different situation, your first line management, and you've got to look out, for me at least, in Baltimore, we look out for them, we protect them, we make sure they do the job the right way, because, I always say this, it's the right thing to do for us as an agency, but it's also the right thing to do for the citizens. So we make sure they do a good job, make sure they're on their A game. But you've got the administrative worries, and then you have the worries for their mental health afterwards. And you went through a situation as a sergeant where one of your officers was involved in a shooting. Did that wind up being fatal?
It was not fatal for the officer. It was fatal for the suspect.
Okay. That clarifies a lot. And the reason I ask that is because to be point blank honest, Jeff, I sometimes struggle with the hands-on use of force, and I don't visualize myself as a violent person. I visualize myself as a person who's peaceful, who's peace-loving, but I can be very violent when need be. And thank God earlier I said all mine survived. That doesn't mean it made it easier for me.
Right. I mean, the officer-involved shooting that I was involved in, the stress associated with that and the impact that it had on me, that was really focused more insularly towards me. Mm-hmm. I saw things just as it impacted me. But as a supervisor, when this shooting occurred with my subordinate officer, I was the officer in charge of the Rampart gang unit, and it was right after the Rampart scandal, and I was brought in to clean things up. So all these officers were handpicked by me. And that's important because it really impacted how close we actually really became. Mm-hmm. And, I would go to these management courses that the LAPD would send me to. And I remember being at one, and they're talking about, you're loving your officers. And I was like, what is this nonsense? Just because we wear the same uniform, I'm going to love my officers. I just kind of was resistant to that. But on this night, when we were just about to go into watch, I was going into the station. I had about 23 guys that worked for me, well, men and women. And I would go in and I'd get the status of each one of them because I would not go home until every single one of my officers were into watch.
Right.
And I just walked into my office, and I hear one of my units say, officer needs help, on foot pursuit, man with a gun, southbound Union Avenue. And I'm like, okay, got to roll. So I'm rolling to it, and I'm very, very intentional in taking deliberate, deep breaths to remain calm because I'm like, when I get there, I first have to get there safely, and then secondarily, when I get there, I have to have a clear head so I can help them in any way I possibly can. And while I'm about maybe a block away from the location, next broadcast comes out. Officer needs help. Shots fired. And at that point, you have no idea what you're going to see when you pull up, and you everything starts to race. And when I arrived, basically what had happened was my officer was in foot pursuit, and he made the tactical decision to holster his gun while he was in foot pursuit to avoid potentially having a negligent discharge.
Right.
Well, what had happened was the suspect had turned right onto another street and then immediately ran up some steps of a bank that had a landing where there was an ATM. And my officer followed but had lost sight of him. And when he turned that corner to go up those steps, the suspect was standing at the top of the steps with his gun pointed right at my officer, and he pulled the trigger. Click. it malfunctioned. And my officer draws his weapon, fires the first round into the stairs, second round into the landing, and then finally up on target with the suspect. Suspect was never able to get any rounds off at the officer, but the rounds that struck the suspect proved to be fatal. And when I got there, my officer was standing there, and he asked me to inspect him. He thought he was shot. And
dude, we did that so many times. We had to frisk each other, frisk ourselves. Am I hit? I don't know.
Yeah, it's just, and the look on his face, I'll never forget it. But the reality here is that we had such a close-knit group of people that this experience, again, that night, since I was the first supervisor to arrive and respond, and they were my personnel, I was interviewed by Force Investigation Division, and I was battling. I was sick. I was barfing in the restroom.
Yep.
And then again, I had the diarrhea problem. And I was thinking to myself, how bizarre is this? This wasn't me that this happened to. This was an officer of mine. But that's when I realized I love every one of these officers that work for me. And because it was like I felt like I had a sense, just like I have a sense to protect my son. It's my responsibility to protect my officers.
Right.
But I saw the magnitude or the scope of the issues of the mental health consequences of a stressful circumstance like this, not just like I did when I was involved with the prior incident we talked about. I didn't just focus on myself. I saw the impact it not only had on the officers that were present at the time of the officer-involved shooting, but every one of my officers in the unit, as well as their family members, and then me as a supervisor. And the importance of making sure that everybody at every one of those levels is taken care of, and there's follow-up and follow-through. And unfortunately, right now, yes, initially, family members can get that counseling or that therapy that they may need. But truth be told, sometimes these things don't rear their ugly head until 5 years later.
And I say funny, it's not ha funny. It can be a long time coming. And for me, I'll only speak for me. It was when I was busy, when I was doing my job, when I knew my roles, I didn't have any problems. It's when I got retired and I was home and things got quiet. That's when the troublesome thinking started. That's when the intrusive thoughts started. That's when people call flashbacks started. All that stuff became an issue for me. And by the way, you said a couple things I can really relate to. You refer to your people as guys. That's men and women. I say it all the time. It's a police thing. And my stomach would be the first thing to go. One of the last shootings I was involved in, I was throwing up. And I've been through other ones before. It wasn't the first time. And there's no predicting him. So thank you. And by the way, before we go into what you're doing today, is this officer okay? How are they doing?
Oh, they're all doing great. These officers that I handpicked, they all went on to have unbelievable careers, whether it was they pursued a career as tacticians in SWAT, or they chose to promote or went the detective route. Every single one of them has done masterfully in their careers.
Please tell them I said thank you as well. You've got a book coming out called On Thin Ice, and then your business law enforcement consultants. Let's talk about your book first. What possessed you to write a book, and what is it about?
Well, what possessed me to write the book was a lot of people would ask me questions about my law enforcement career,
right,
and they would find it fascinating, and they would say, "You need to write a book." They encouraged me to do so. So, I have a very unique background, and so my book is kind of a blend of two genres. It's a memoir because you have to understand my personal background and my professional experiences to understand the other aspect of my book, which is a prescriptive nonfiction where I discuss actionable solutions to help improve law enforcement moving forward in the 21st century. And, because my background, I was born to a teenage mother, and I was put up for adoption, lived in a foster home when I was young, and then I was adopted. I was adopted by two wonderful people. My mother and father were outstanding people. My father was a sociologist, and my mother was a chemist. But they wanted 4 kids, and they wanted them each 1 year apart. And my mom gave up her career as a chemist, and they had applied for adoption, and had just gotten approved for it at the time my mom got pregnant with my sister. So they wanted the 4 kids, like I had said. So they said, let's move forward with the adoption. So they adopted me. They adopted my brother, who's Japanese, and then I have a foster sister who's black. And we all grew up in the 60s and 70s in Kent, Ohio. So that experience is quite unique. And it gave me a different paradigm in which I looked at
and back
the world
then, people
through,
didn't do that. It was nowadays we don't blink an eye. Back then, I'm smiling when you tell a story. And I'll tell you back to talk about that because I'm sure it had a profound impact on how you policed. Let's just say that we're running out of time. Jeff Wenninger's upcoming book is called On Thin Ice. He did 33 years in law enforcement, retired LAPD lieutenant, and his website is lawenforcementconsultants.com. Jeff, again, thanks for your service. And number 2, thanks for being a guest on the show. Talk about it. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
This was the podcast version of the nationally syndicated Law Enforcement Talk radio show, and we are so glad that you decided to join us. Big thanks to our guests for telling their story on the show. 2 simple things you can do. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com. That's letradio.com. And be sure to follow us or like us on Facebook. Do a search on Facebook for Law Enforcement Talk radio show, and be sure when you see a post that we put up that you like, that you resonate with, that gets your attention, be sure to share it with your friends. Back in just a few days, another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk radio show and podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.